Welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reasoning with faith. Okay, and we're live. Welcome, everyone. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Garte. He's a PhD in biochemistry, and he was a professor at New York University, Rutgers University, University of Pittsburgh. He's an author of 2 books, soon to be 3 books, and he just exploded onto the scene. God has been really doing amazing things in his life, and I'm so excited to just be able to pick his brain. Also, if you're interested in God and nature, there is a God and Nature magazine, which he's the editor-in-chief of. But yeah, without further ado, welcome, Dr. Sai. I know you're just telling me to call you Sai, so welcome, Sai.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, I've been following a lot of your stuff. I'm sure those tuning in are familiar with your talks, your debates, your books. The question that I have for you is: was there a particular time in your life where that crossroad happened, that shift happened from not believing in God to maybe starting to believe in God or doubting atheism?
Oh, absolutely. It's a good way to put it. I started by doubting my disbelief. And the way that happened originally was basically through my career as a scientist, both as a graduate student and later as a professional researcher. As a grad student, I was studying biochemistry, and I had been a chemistry major in college, and to do that, you have to learn a little bit about physics, especially, modern physics.
Hmm.
And what I was learning about quantum theory and relativity and the uncertainty principle and other things in physics
Hmm.
led me to question my very strong belief in materialism, which is basically that everything can be explained eventually by fairly straightforward, simple mathematical equations that describe the material world. And it's the philosophy that everything can be known. If you know the past perfectly, you can predict the future. In fact, modern physics says, no, you cannot do that. That's the essence of the uncertainty principle of Heisenberg, and it also applies to many other things. And then when I began studying biochemistry, the details of how cells work, I just couldn't believe it. I mean, the things that cells do, and I go into some detail on this in my upcoming book, which will be published in August, which is about biology and God. And the details are, I mean, I don't go into too much detail because that would be a little bit, inaccessible. But I tried to show, and I hope I do, that kind of complex, it's not just very complex, it's something that there's no easy way, or there's no way to
Hmm.
understand how that could have originated from nothing, from just chemicals in the sea. And I say that not as a philosophical idea, but as a scientific one. I mean, scientifically, in fact, I
Wow.
recently published a paper, a scientific paper, mathematically showing that you can't evolve life. Life can evolve once it's started, but you can't get the beginning of life through what we now know as evolution. So how did it
Wow.
possibly start? It nobody knows, and scientifically, and it started, and I I believe that God created life as He created the universe and humanity and everything else with an origin, but still there has to be a scientific answer. Even if God did it, he did it. God works through science is the way that we have natural laws. Gravity comes from God. Everything comes from God. So how did life come about? And we don't know, but I my guess is that there will be an answer to that, but that answer, like many other answers in science, will point strongly to a divine creator.
Wow. When you're mentioning that, you published a paper mathematically. What would you say to someone? Um, how could you prove that mathematically that evolution can evolve? Is it through the DNA coding? Is it through?
No, this is actually a very simple thing. And in fact, it's not totally original. A
Mm,
very famous scientist named Manfred Eigen had put this out many, many decades ago
mm,
with different starting ideas because it was a long time ago, but came to pretty much the same conclusion. And it has to do with error. It has to do with the fact that when living organisms, all living organisms, reproduce themselves, they do it with almost no error, a
mm,
tiny, tiny degree of error, which is good because that allows for evolution. But there's no such thing as perfect reproduction, and you need very, very high level of accuracy in reproduction in order for evolution to work. And
mhm.
that's written into the equations on evolution. So all I did was I took those equations and I sort of rearranged them in a way to show that there is a threshold, which is pretty high of
Wow.
accuracy that you have to pass. So how early chemicals could have reproduced themselves with that accuracy is not known. It's probably not possible. So
Interesting.
yeah,
One of the comments often that we'll get in some of our videos is, well, eventually science will find it out. You give it enough time, kind of uh,
yeah.
evolution of the gaps, so to speak.
Yeah, it can be that, but I also think that that's somewhat true. And in fact, in physics, nobody could understand how light could be at a constant speed. It doesn't matter whether you're running away or going towards it; if the speed
Mm,
is the same, that doesn't make any sense at all. And some people said, "Well, that's too hard, forget it." But Einstein came up with an answer. Now, the interesting thing is that the answer to that and the answer to a lot of other things in physics, and especially quantum theory, uh, they're scientifically absolutely valid, but they don't make any sense in
mm,
terms of the way we think of science as being very logical, very sensible. They don't make that kind of sense. It
mm.
just, there's something called quantum superposition and uh, things that just don't, that we can't understand them. We know they're true, but and a great way to look into this further is to look into the double slit experiment, which describes why electrons or photons, little tiny particles, are both waves and they're particles at the same time, much like Jesus Christ was a man and God at the same time. And when
Wow.
people tell me that that doesn't make any sense, I say, yeah, right, just like physics,
Hmm.
because electrons are both fully particle and fully wave at the same time, and they can act as either one or both. So, yeah,
Wow.
science reflects theology very closely. And that
Wow.
was what led me to say, well, gee, wait a minute, maybe this absolute materialism is not the whole story. There must be something else. I don't know what it is. I wasn't ready to believe in Jesus, that's for sure. I'd been
Hmm.
taught Christianity was a terrible evil and certainly not true and just awful. And for those who haven't heard me before or read any books, I grew up in a very strong atheist, also communist family. And so religion was the root of all evil. you know?
Wow.
So I dropped that view and I became sort of an agnostic. I just didn't know, and I didn't think about it much, like many
Hmm.
of the nuns today.
Hmm.
Religion, I don't know. I'm too busy. Don't bother me.
Hmm.
And that's where I was for quite some time. And I might have stayed there. I might be there now, except that the Holy Spirit had mercy on me and dragged me over by
What would
direct
you say?
intervention. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say to someone who is there, who might
Mhm.
they've now not completely rejected atheism, but they're at that agnostic phase where they're
Right.
going, well, I don't know, and I don't really care.
Right.
What would you say to someone who is in that phase and they're just, especially out here, perhaps in the West, we're just out there to make bread, so to speak, bring home the bacon.
Right.
And they're just busy with their careers, with their schooling, and they just, I'm agnostic. It doesn't matter. My life is fine. God is not really relevant to me, even if he does exist.
Well, my answer will surprise you. What I would say to that person is, great, you're happy. I got nothing to say. That's fine.
Mhm.
God is good to you. Even if you don't believe in him, enjoy.
Mhm.
But I will tell you that a time will come, because it comes to everybody,
Mhm.
when you will say, somebody help me,
Mhm.
please.
Mhm.
I'm drowning. I'm in trouble. I don't know what to do. Help me. And Jesus will hear you, because Jesus is there all the time. You don't believe in him. You don't care. You don't want to know, but he's walking beside you every minute of every day, just in case, because you will trip and you will fall and you won't be able to get up. And at that moment, remember that Jesus is there. And when you say, help me, if you add the word, help me, Christ, he will pick you up. He will lift you up. How do I know this? Because it's happened to almost everybody I know.
Wow.
And if you think about it, it's happened to people you know too.
Mhm.
And the number of testimonies, before we were talking about Jana Harmon and the Ex-Skeptic series, and she has innumerable interviews with people who have had that experience. It didn't happen to me that way completely. Jesus didn't wait until I was really desperate.
Mhm.
Although I'm not actually sure that's true. It might have been true, but I wasn't aware of it,
Mhm.
because I've had some difficult times, which I got out of, and now I know that that was the grace of God.
Mhm.
But what the Holy Spirit did with me was give me dreams and give me experiences, and I've discussed these on other broadcasts you've heard, which just forced me to acknowledge the reality of God, the reality of Jesus Christ as my Savior, because I couldn't deny the things that had happened.
Mhm.
And once I did that, there were two major events, one of which I haven't talked about much before,
Mhm.
if at all. The first one was a situation where I was having a discussion with a new Christian friend and explaining to her why I had such deep-seated anger in me, which
Mhm.
at one point was just becoming almost a problem for my life. And it came from this experiences I had as a young child, as a youth,
Mhm.
of being very badly abused and bullied by a neighborhood gang. I grew up in
Oh,
Brooklyn.
wow.
It was a tough area.
Mhm.
And I got into problems with this gang, and I had 2 years at the age of 13 where I really had a miserable life. At that point, there was no way I was going to pray to God, because I knew
Mhm.
God didn't exist, and I, was absolutely a firm atheist.
Mhm.
But I became very, very angry, and that's another story which I won't get into. But that anger stayed with me through adulthood.
Mhm.
And when I explained this to this friend, she simply said, "Well, now you have to forgive them." And I
Mhm.
said, "No, I'm not. I'm not going to forgive them. They were terrible."
Mhm.
And we had this conversation for a while, and at the end of it, something came over me, and I realized, what could it hurt? And I just said out loud, "I forgive them."
Mhm.
Burst into tears, felt
Wow.
this huge wave of relief come over me,
Wow.
and something heavy like a stone just went away.
Wow.
I wasn't a Christian yet,
Mm.
but the same thing happened when I had my experience, which I've described before, about giving a sermon about how God loves even me. And when I came out of that vision, I realized this is all true. And I said, I believe. And that was it. I said it out loud. I was alone in my car
Mm.
and stopped by the side of the road, luckily. And I said, I believe, burst into tears. And that was it. At that
Mm.
point, I became what I am today,
Mhm.
a devout and totally worshiping Christian.
Wow. And h how old were you in that moment where you said you were 13 when you decided to forgive, or that's when you got bullied?
Oh, that's when the bad stuff happened.
Okay. And then you were with
I
a Christian
I
friend?
it took several decades. I was in
Oh,
my
wow.
40s before I
Wow.
was able to forgive that.
Okay. And then soon after then, was it then an encounter with Jesus?
Exactly. So about another, I don't know, let's see, when 46. It was another decade or so.
Wow.
I was in
Yeah.
my mid-50s when I had
Mhm.
that
Wow.
experience, and it still took some time for me because my life was very complicated, but
Mhm.
eventually I got baptized and
Wow.
joined the church.
Wow. So it's been this, some people will say that, they've had kind of a Damascus moment, right?
Right.
Like with Paul or something. Others, they've really experienced the sanctification of the Holy Spirit of kind of inching towards
Yeah.
Christ and just these pivotal crossroad moments that they realize, okay, yeah, this was that turning point. And so is that how you would describe kind
Yes,
of? Mhm.
exactly. I
Mhm.
mean, it took a long time.
Yeah.
And part of that was because, when you're born into a particular worldview, it
Mhm.
takes a long time to shed that. And so it did take me quite a while, but
Mhm.
it's permanent. I mean, people have asked me, well, what would make you go back and become an atheist again? And I said, I can't even conceive of it. It's not something that, I know several Christians who have deconverted and
Mm.
become atheists, and I just don't get it. It's not something I could even imagine.
What can you see is the difference between, the atheist you, the agnostic you, and the Jesus follower that you are now?
I don't know where to start. I mean, it's the difference is huge.
Mm.
You know, and some things are the same. I still have the same sense of humor. I still,
Mhm.
you know, screw up with stuff that I've always screwed up with. But several major things have changed. All that rage went away, all that anger.
Well,
Fear went away. Before the rage, I was full of fear.
mm.
The anger cured the fear.
Wow.
I became someone who was not afraid of anybody. But I was angry at everybody to the point where people told me that I had to change because my anger was getting people worried.
Wow.
So it was very bad. And I took some measures to help that. Well, one of the
Mhm.
things I did as a young man was study martial arts,
Mm.
Taekwondo, Korean style. And that helped. I think mostly because of the meditative aspect and various things of that. It's somewhat spiritual,
Mhm.
but it wasn't until I said I forgive them that it really went away, and it wasn't
Mm.
until I said I believe that all the fear and all the anxiety, everything that had been part of me disappeared. And what
Mhm.
replaced it is basically love.
Wow.
I cry a lot when I listen to some beautiful worship music or a hymn. I can't
Mhm.
help tearing up. And
Mm.
until I became a believer, I never cried at all, ever.
Wow, is that right?
Well, that was my upbringing. You don't cry when you're a kid in Brooklyn. It doesn't lead to good results. So, lots of things changed. I became much more emotional. I didn't lose any of my scientific credentials and worldview and thoughts. I've been publishing papers ever since, even way after I retired. So,
Mm.
last paper I published was 2024.
And that was the one on the mathematical equation.
Yeah, exactly. And I had several papers before that as well, last
Wow.
few years. So I'm still a scientist in every sense of the word. Nobody pays me. I'm retired, but I still do it, and I still have a scientific worldview. And I praise the Lord that He has shown me, along with many other people, that there's no contradiction between those two paths: the path of science and the path of Christian faith.
Yeah, and I think that oftentimes people will say that you either believe in science or believe in God.
Right.
Why do you think, even to this day, 2025, that there's still a lot of people out there saying that? And what do you have to say to that?
Well, it's a lie. I sometimes call it a Satan lie, a lie from Satan, who is the prince of lies. And the lie started in the 19th century, the late 19th century. Before that, science and all the scientists were Christians, and they weren't just nominal Christians. People like Robert Boyle, the founder of chemistry, and Faraday and Maxwell, the founders of electricity and electrodynamics, all that stuff. They were devout Christians, and Faraday wrote more about Christianity than he did about science. So, I mean, there was no history of this. It started with the publication of a couple of books by a philosopher and a scientist who claimed that there was a war between science and religion. And then it caught on during the beginning of the 20th century, and it grew from there. And then we had new atheism recently, which made it almost a religion. And,
Yes.
And it became very popular in academia, very popular in the media, even Hollywood to a large extent. And it's just fake. It's false. It's a mistake. And, my as I mentioned before, my preferred target audience are students who want to study science, but they grew up Christian, and they're being told, or they get the sense, that you can't do both. And that is absolutely untrue. Absolutely true. There are great, not only in the past, there are great scientists alive today, Nobel Prize winners, famous scientists, Francis Collins, the recent head of the NIH, who are devout evangelical Christians, and they're brilliant scientists. There's no contradiction. And if there's any message I want to convey, it's that. There's no reason to think that science and faith are contradictory.
So what would you say to someone who might, comment down below, well, science already proved God wrong? There's kind of these
I love that comment.
General statements that people say.
I love that comment because it is completely false in several different ways.
Okay.
First of all, science never proves anything. Please write that down and memorize it. I'm speaking as a professor now.
Yes.
Science is not in the business of proof. Sorry to inform you of that fact, but it's true. And I once had this conversation with an atheist who said, well, that's nonsense. Of course it does. I said, okay, show me any scientific paper published in a scientific journal that uses the word proof. Not math, because math does prove. Not logic, because logic does prove. Science does not prove. It gives strong evidence for. There's no such thing as extraordinary evidence. There's strong evidence and weak evidence. So let's take a simple example. What is the molecule that is responsible for inheritance? At the beginning of the 20th century, everybody thought it was some kind of protein because proteins were doing everything else in the cell. Nobody thought it was nucleic acid, DNA, or RNA, because nucleic acids were too simple. They're composed of only a few components. Then in the 1940s, a guy named Oswald Avery did some experiments where he showed that some inherited characteristics are tied to the DNA, not to proteins. And people said, that's impossible. How could that be? But that was some evidence for DNA as the genetic material, but it was weak evidence because it didn't have a good explanation. He got it from chemical experiments. People thought, well, it's an artifact. There must have been a protein in there. And then in 1953, a few years later, Watson and Crick came up with the double helix. Mm-hmm. And that was proof. Well, no, it wasn't proof. That was strong evidence that the DNA is the genetic material. Why do I say it isn't proof? Because whenever you find something that you absolutely believe is true in science, you still know that further research could change it. Proof doesn't work that way. If you prove something in mathematics, it's almost impossible to change that with further work. But in science, for example, we now know when we talk about inheritance, there are things besides the DNA that are related to inheritance. There are epigenetic effects. There are other codes besides the genetic code that affect how cells work. Dennis Noble, a very famous physiologist from Britain, who's not a theist, by the way, has published a lot on this. So, even the idea that inheritance is comes from DNA, it's not absolutely 100% true. So science never proves anything. That's the first part of that comment that's wrong. The second part, which is that science has proven God doesn't exist, that's complete nonsense because God is beyond scientific investigation. Science is defined as the way to study the natural world. By definition, God is not part of our natural world. God created the natural world. He didn't create himself. He created the natural world, which we all live in. We don't know how God came to be. That's unknowable. It's certainly unknowable by science. We can't know anything about God through science. But we can know everything about our natural world through science, which is a creation of God. So that tells us a little bit about God. Long answer, but that's an important question.
Wow. What about when someone will say something like, well, now that we have science, because I've heard this before, well, we have science, now we have no need for religion or God or any of these other beliefs that were used because we didn't have science. And
that, you see, the problem with that argument is it has nothing to do with Christianity. That's an argument that is all related to the ancient type of religion, so to speak.
The myths,
which covered everything. It covered the natural world and it covered everything else. So, thunder. Okay, thunder is caused by demons or gods bowling or whatever. Lightning is Thor throwing something. That hasn't been part of religion for 2,000 years. I mean, I don't know why this argument is still used. It's nonsense. Yeah, we don't. If you say we have science, so we don't need God. So my simple question is, do you love your husband or wife? Why? Can science tell you why? And don't tell me it's hormones and that's science of the gaps. That's not hormones. That doesn't explain why you love anything or anybody. So, I mean, it's part of the process of expressing love, perhaps, but it's not why.
Mm.
So, yes, we need God to explain why we have morals, why we think there's good and evil, why we love, why we don't love. We need God to explain so much of our lives
Mhm.
that science cannot even touch and is not supposed to touch. I mean, even my father, who was as strict devout atheist as you could get,
Hmm.
and was also a chemist, he was a scientist.
Uh-huh.
And he said to me, science cannot deal with everything.
Hmm.
He was not a scientismist. He didn't believe in scientism. And this
Mm.
idea that we don't need anything once we have science, that's just a ridiculous philosophy that you can disprove in a minute.
Hmm.
All you have to say is, I once asked one of these people, okay, so what about art? How
Mhm.
can you tell whether a piece of art is good or not? How does
Mhm.
science come into that? And he said, oh,
Right.
it's very easy. Just find out what the price is of the art. If it's higher, it's better. If it's lower, it's not. And he was serious. That's a scientific, quantifiable answer. And of course, complete nonsense.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting how well people will go to the biochemistry that's happening in your brain and the
Mhm.
hormones and the dopamine releases that are happening,
Right.
but then when you point out that well the same thing happens when I have a Kit Kat bar, so is that love as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. And,
um,
tha- and
uh,
that's a mechanism. That's not an answer. That's not a
ah,
that's not a cause. That's a mechanism. And we know there are mechanisms for everything.
right. So what they're spouting is the mechanism, not the
Right.
answer to that, and it is a
Part of the mechanism. Part of it.
right, right. Wow. Okay, that's a good one. And what about for someone who would say, well, okay, we're talking about evidence now. What they don't say, there's no proof of God, or that God didn't, science didn't prove God wrong. But what if they say something like, well, there's zero evidence for God,
Yeah.
or there's weak evidence for God?
Okay. Well, the zero evidence is, I mean, that's what Aaron Ra has said. That's what Matt
Yes.
Dillahunty says, and many other
And
people.
you've debated them as well in the
I did,
past. And
well, I didn't debate Dillahunty. I don't
oh,
want to get into that. Dillahunty's
mhm,
another story. But
mhm,
anyway,
mhm,
um, but yeah, I had a very good conversation with Aaron Ra about
mm,
that, where I told him, I'm not sure you're really using evidence in the right way.
mm,
And there's a huge amount of evidence for God.
mhm.
And that includes from all the sciences, the fine tuning of the constants, the cosmological constants,
Yep.
is evidence for God. It
Mhm,
doesn't prove God. There are one or two other possible explanations which are not any better than God,
mhm,
the God explanation. But yeah, it doesn't prove it. But it's strong evidence. That's one. The other, I believe, is the origin of life, which is, I think, again, is not proof because there
mhm,
may be a scientific explanation for the origin of life. We have no idea what it is, but there could be one. I don't rule that out. But I think that if we do find one, it'll turn out to point to God, just as physics
mm,
does.
mhm,
So that's evidence, I think, for God. At the moment, I would say it is weak, but it can get stronger.
mm,
Every time we rule out another alternative, it gets a little stronger.
mhm,
What else? Well, then there's related to that is all the ways that life works, the existence of the genetic code.
mhm,
We don't know any way that the genetic code could evolve. It, and the reason for that is technical and has to do with the requirement for evolution to have very high reproductive accuracy, which I've discussed elsewhere, and it's too long to go into now. But
mhm,
um, there is strong evidence that the genetic code had to be created. The genetic code is the first example of meaning where something means something else in the universe. If you think about it, rocks, volcanoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, the weather in general, the sun, the planets, gravity, they don't have any meaning. They just are.
mm,
They're laws, which I believe came from God, but any way you want to think where they came from, They're laws of science, they're natural laws, things that happen, but they don't have any meaning. The genetic code means something. And that was required for life because life is full of meaning. It's full of purpose. It's full of agency. And all of this I discuss in great detail in my upcoming book, which will come out in August, called Beyond Evolution. New discoveries in the science of life point to God. And, that's strong evidence for God, the fact that there is code. all the codes we know come from a coder. And,
Right.
So there's plenty of evidence and many other things. I at some point I've made a list. But to say there's zero evidence or only very weak evidence is simply wrong. It's just not.
And as a biochemist, do most scientists agree that the genetic code, the DNA code, that it is a code, it is a language?
Richard Dawkins agrees.
Even Richard Dawkins
agrees.
Yeah,
even Richard Dawkins. I need not say any more. I would strongly recommend a channel on explaining science to people by a guy named, oh my goodness, I'm blanking on everything. Stated Clearly is the name of the channel.
Stated Clearly.
Stated Clearly. And it's, it'll come to me. The name will come to me. But look for Stated Clearly.
Okay.
It's run by a man who's an atheist.
Oh, wow.
And but he's very knowledgeable on science. He's not an actual scientist himself, but like Aaron Ra is really knowledgeable on biology. And this guy who does Stated Clearly is very knowledgeable in science. And I've had some arguments with atheists who deny that the code is a real code. And by the way, I consider this a sign of the end of atheism, because when any group of people begin denying the reality of science, they're doomed. And this has become a very popular atheist meme. It's completely untrue. And in fact, Stephen Woodward had made that. Stephen Woodward is called Rationality Rules. He's a very famous atheist in Britain. He made a video saying that the genetic code is not a real code way back. I don't remember when, but some time ago. And when I saw it, I made a video showing why he was wrong. He made an error in confusing the gene sequence with the genetic code. The sequence is not the code. The code is a language. The sequence, everybody has a different sequence, and that makes me and you different, for example.
Right.
The sequences of the bases. But the bases all mean the same amino acids in every living creature. Not just humans. All throughout life, it's the same language. And that's meaning. And that's a code. And everything else about a code fits. So the people who are saying that are not scientists. They're atheists who don't understand the science. And that's why Dawkins was interviewed by Stated Clearly, and he said, that's nonsense. You know how Dawkins talks. That's complete nonsense. Of course, it's a code.
So even Dawkins agrees.
Oh, all biologists. I mean, it's in every biology textbook. It's in every biological scientific paper. I mean, this idea that it's not really a code, I don't know who came up with it, but it's complete nonsense. Okay.
And is it true that, for those that are positing evolution at a macro level, is it true that you can't take that code? Like, for example, in order to have a video game, you need to have a software code for the video game. So let's say we had in the 1990s Pac-Man, a very primitive kind of video game. And could that code of that video game eventually turn into Call of Duty Modern Warfare or something like that, like a three-dimensional internet code today? Is that possible at all?
Sure. That's possible because we are doing it.
Yes.
We are intelligent, creative beings. By the way, I should say I have no problem with evolution. I think evolution, when I say beyond evolution, what I'm
Yes,
saying
yes,
is it's not the whole story.
yes.
Evolution is not the whole story in biology. There's a lot more going on.
Hmm.
Science, just in terms of mainstream science. So evolution is great, but it doesn't tell you anything about how life began, and it doesn't say anything about us, anything important. We are evolved apes, that's true, but in our bodies, not
Hmm.
in our brains, minds, and souls.
Mm.
So I believe that humans were created by God because we have stuff that no other animal has.
Hmm.
And I don't believe that came from evolution. And that's a big argument, which could be a whole nother session.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that. So, in terms of evolution of code, yes, but remember that the code doesn't evolve itself.
Hmm.
We humans change it.
Yes.
We conscious beings change it. The difference is that in life evolves itself, but it can't make itself. In other words, God had to make it just as we had to make the first Pac-Man code or whatever it was,
Yes.
or begin computers start out with software.
Hmm.
That was a human construct, a human
Yes.
creation.
And even a software developer will tell you that you can't just punch in random code and then come up with this new. It needs to
Yeah,
be very
right.
precise and
That's right. And you cannot make mistakes.
yes.
Right? The errors in coding are much stricter than the errors in life.
Hmm.
I know this from experience, as is anyone who tried to, write a program now.
And is it the same with the DNA code? It's similar.
Not quite. No,
Okay.
there's a little room for error. Um, there's actually quite a bit of room for error,
Mm.
but there's a limit. If
Mm.
if you make the wrong error or it comes too soon, dead, no life.
Mm. You know what you said there, that's a sign of the end of, atheism.
Yeah.
And Cameron actually was capturing Christianity,
Mhm.
actually said in one of his videos recently that he feels the whole atheist debate phase, at least on YouTube, is kind of coming to an end.
I
And
agree.
what he was suggesting was move into more kind of Islam, because that's kind of now something that's coming up. Uh, have you delved into uh, apologetics against Islam by any chance?
Well, I am familiar with David Wood, who I think is the premier Christian apologist who tackles Islam.
Yes.
I don't, because
Mm.
first of all, I know very little about Islam,
Mm.
and I'm not really interested in learning.
Mm.
Um, so, uh, but I know other people who are, working on it,
Hmm.
and it's a difficult subject. But getting back to atheism, there's a great recent book by Justin Brierley, who is a wonderful podcaster, called The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God.
Mm.
And he, like Jana Harmon, is chronicling many people who are recently coming to faith, largely in Britain, but also in the US. And I believe, I'm almost sure that he is about to send a forward for my new book. So
Wow.
that'll be great. And in fact, I hope to get it at the end of today. So, there is a sense, and also the book that you mentioned earlier, Coming to Faith Through Dawkins by Dennis Alexander and Alistair McGrath, is also about former atheists coming to faith. And
Hmm.
Jana Harmon has her wonderful channel on Ex Skeptic. So there is a tendency, there is a trend of some kind. How much, how important, how much it'll last, we don't know. But there is some evidence that the younger generation, Generation Z, is starting to look a little bit into Christianity with some interest. I know that some people are converting to Islam. I myself never considered Islam. It has aspects of it that I find frankly repulsive, and I'm not interested in. I've never been interested in following through. But yes, it is. It has become a major contender with Christianity. And I think people like Cameron and David Wood, who I mentioned, are correct to address it, because there are all kinds of reasons to do so, not just theological, but social and political as well.
Hmm. I mean, even Dawkins was calling himself a
Oh yeah,
cultural atheist, right?
yeah.
Even Alex O'Connor will call themselves a cultural atheist.
Well, the influence of Islam in Britain,
Or sorry, a cultural Christian.
cultural Christian, yes, and the reason is, and some of this is the work of Tom. Oh, he wrote Dominion. Can't remember his last name. Sorry, I'm pretty old, so I get these lapses.
You're
Uh,
still very sharp.
uh, that's he's an atheist philosopher who has come to the conclusion, and getting more and more in that direction,
Hmm.
that Christianity was absolutely critical to the growth of our modern moral, democratic, liberal world.
Hmm.
Islam is in the other direction.
Hmm.
I mean, it's not Islam. It's not the original Islam. It's the Islam we know today, which was derived from the sect in the late 19th century, the Wahhabi sect, which is incredibly fundamentalist. And that brand of Islam, which took over the whole Muslim world, is regressive. I mean, in every way, socially, politically, I don't know, in any way. So and in Britain, it's scary because, and in other parts of Europe, it's actually scary because it's growing hugely. And a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, better Christianity than this stuff. If that's our choice.
Yeah, I think it was, I don't know where I saw it, but I think there are now 85 Sharia courts in the UK or something like that.
Yeah, some of it is scary. It's really.
And so it's interesting how atheists will claim to be cultural Christian because they want to keep the culture of Christianity.
And what they're admitting is that Christianity is the source of a lot of what we take for granted as good stuff, like education, like, the rights of women, like so many things that started with Christianity, like hospitals. That's where it came from, folks.
Yeah.
That's historical fact.
And some are even saying that, well, the founders of America did not want to found it on Judeo-Christian values. They wanted to, they were deists, etc. But the early fathers, the early population of the United States was predominantly Christian as well, right?
Well, not only that, they actually did found it on Christian principles. It practically said all men are created equal.
Yes.
That's a Christian idea. That didn't
Genesis.
come from the Roman Empire. That didn't come from medieval unchristian, from the medieval Islamic takeover. I mean, all men are created equal was, in fact, we still don't follow it, but that's at least the idea comes from Christ.
Yeah,
and other things in the Constitution as well. So, no, I think it's a mistake to say. I mean, they may not have been. Not all of them were Orthodox Christians, but many of them were. But even the ones who weren't, like perhaps Tom Paine, Thomas Jefferson, whatever, they certainly were liberals in the sense of how Christianity affected the world. They believed in all those Christian views about people.
Have you had? I mean, when you were an atheist, agnostic for a very long time, I'm sure you had friends as well who were atheists, agnostic, also
in science. Yeah, almost all of them.
Right.
Right.
And have they kind of commented on your conversion or challenged it or questioned it?
Not as much as you'd think. I have several friends in the sciences who are not Christian, never will be, but they're okay.
Hmm.
They're okay with me. They don't understand it. They wouldn't
Hmm.
follow me, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe, it's a question of who's blessed. Although I think they are blessed people as well, but
Hmm.
maybe they haven't had that moment that I described way back, that moment of help me and where do I go and where do I turn?
Hmm.
Maybe they haven't had that and they're happy as they are. And as I
Hmm.
said before, my first answer and my answer to them is fine. I don't try to convert them.
Hmm.
If they have a question, I answer it.
Hmm.
But I'm not, in a way, I don't even consider myself an apologist because I'm not out to convert all atheists. I think it's great that other people are doing it. It's just not my calling.
Hmm.
I feel much more a calling to try to help Christians who are wavering,
Hmm.
who are doubtful, especially if it has to do with science, to
Hmm.
help them keep the faith,
Hmm.
remain in the faith, grow in the faith. And I fully support the real apologists who are, I don't know how they do it, but they're able to go out there and convince people to come to Christ. I think that's wonderful. I just not one who feels I can do that.
And what would you say to, a student out there who is wrestling with their faith, who's, might have a bunch of these professors there, really pushing their ideology in the classroom, and they're at the edge. Maybe they grew up in a Christian home, or maybe they're wondering, hey, is this the truth, so to speak?
Yeah.
Um, what
Well,
would you say to someone who's kind of on the wall there?
well, I would say to them, read the books,
Mm,
my books, the books of several other people, Michael Gwilyn,
mhm,
several people who are scientists. Read the book by Dennis Alexander, who's a chemist, and Alistair McGrath, who is a chemist, and sorry, Dennis is a biologist, and many other people who are scientists who write books about the complete harmony and compatibility of science, the Christian faith. You've been lied to. If you've been told you have to choose, no, that's a lie. It's absolutely untrue, and it's proven so many ways. Uh, I have a list in one of the books, I don't remember which, of the scientists who are Christians, and it's almost everyone alive before, 1900, and even after that, it includes a large number of scientists. So it's just a false statement.
do you find that now scientists, the upcoming scientists now, are more atheists than?
I don't know. I think a lot is going on there. There have been Elaine Eklund is a sociologist who's done a lot of studies on this, on
Mm,
the way people, especially scientists, feel about religion. And there are surveys, and Pew has some surveys, and it's hard to interpret. It looks like it also depends on what questions are asked, but it looks like, yeah, most scientists would not consider themselves faithful.
mm,
But not by a huge amount. It's a very
mm.
large minority that are faithful. Something like 40%.
Oh.
They have a faith. It may not be Christianity,
Mhm,
maybe Islam, Hindu, Jewish, but uh, and then surveys come out with what are called the top scientists, which are people in the National Academy of Sciences, and they have a very high number of atheists. But what people
mm.
don't understand is that is a self-selecting organization. They vote the
Ah.
members in, and there are some incredibly good scientists who've been denied entrance because they're Christian.
Mm,
So it's a fallacy to use that data to say these are the best scientists. Yeah, they're all good scientists, but they're the best scientists who are not Christian.
I see, it's self-selecting.
It's self-selecting, yes. So
Wow.
anyway, there is a lot of prejudice against faith in people roughly of my age, which is, well over 60, 65. And there is some at some other ages, but younger scientists, I think less so. I think there's more openness, and that may increase. But that's just a guess. We don't really have great data on that. Yeah.
There's some people are saying there is a shift. You were mentioning Justin Brierley, and he's talking about how perhaps the younger generation are coming to God, and with everybody's looking to the U.S. Everybody's looking at Trump getting elected. Everybody's looking at the executive orders that he's signing, and some are suggesting that there may be a shift now back to God culturally, where for a long time, for several decades, there was a shift away from God, that perhaps now that pendulum is kind of swinging on the other side. Do you sense that?
I do, but I'm not sure what it has to do with Trump. I think it started before that, and I think it's not relevant to the politics. I think what I think is happening is people are starting to wake up to the fact that atheism provides nothing. It's a negative point of view, and many people have said that. If you ask them, why do you believe in atheism? I don't believe in atheism. I don't believe in anything.
Right.
Well, the problem is if you take atheism to its end, and there are people who have done that, and Dawkins has done that, what you end up with is there's no purpose, there's no meaning, there's no right or wrong, there's no good or evil, there's no there's nothing. It's just you live the best way you can. There's no really particular good reason to be moral. At least they haven't come up with one, except it's good to be moral. And some of them say that evolution makes morality because it works better. People who are moral, who are good to each other, do better than people who are bad to each other. Yeah, that's one of these just so stories that really isn't science. No, the truth is that every human being on the planet, no matter what faith or lack of faith they have, knows that there's something that's good and something that's bad. They may disagree on what that is, but they know that there's evil and there's good. Where does that come from? Animals don't know that. Tell a dog, bad dog. They look at you like, I don't know what he's saying, but it seems upset. So I don't know. Good and evil are human constructs. Where did they come from? Well, you could say it's part of human evolution. I think it's part of the human soul, and that came from God. So, there's another proof, other evidence. So I don't know. I think, Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
And the aside from the book that's coming out, what are some up and coming things or projects that you're working on? Is it primarily the book coming out in August?
Well, I'm actually starting another book, but this is very, very hypothetical. It's mostly in my head.
Okay. Oh, nice.
Because generally you have to focus on one book at a time, although many writers who are much better than me are able to write one or two or three books at once. I can't do that. So I have thoughts for a further book. We'll see what happens. I'm working on every quarter I put out this magazine, God and Nature, which is a magazine of essays, poetry, a few columns that describes many things in the field of science in terms of Christian faith and vice versa. And I do that, as I say. I have one coming up in a couple of weeks to put out, and I keep pretty busy with other stuff.
And the God and Nature website.
Yeah, it's God and Nature at asa3.org.
Okay, got it. I'm gonna make sure we get that as well here. So you're the editor-in-chief there.
And that's open to everyone. It's free, and anyone can submit material.
Wow, nice. And the title of your upcoming book?
Sorry, I just want to add one more thing.
Yes.
I recently, just last week, had an essay published in something called the Worldview Bulletin,
Worldview Bulletin.
And that's also about science and faith. So your listeners might be interested in that. It just
Okay.
Worldview Bulletin, and it came out, I think, just this past week.
Okay. Yeah. We'll make sure to link that as well. And then your latest book, the one that's coming out in August.
Oh, that doesn't have a link yet. It's not.
Is there a title for it?
Yes. Beyond Evolution: How New Discoveries in the Science of Life Point to God.
Wow.
It's published by Tyndale, which
Wow.
is a new publisher for me. It as I said, it'll probably be ready for pre-order in late spring or early spring. I don't know.
Okay, we'll definitely be watching out for that. There's
Yeah.
Tyndale University just down the street here
Oh, okay.
in Toronto. Yeah, a couple of my friends go there. So that's cool. Oh, wow, by Tyndale. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
I was thrilled to get that. I mean, they're a wonderful publishing company.
Yes. Yes.
They have some great books.
Incredible. Well, Sai, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, sharing your story. It's been a pleasure. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, we'll have your website here as well. Your website's been scrolling there in the banner.
And it's the contact page. You can. I have some kind of a glitch there, so
Okay.
It's supposed to acknowledge when you sent something. If it doesn't, don't worry. It's coming through anyway. It's just the acknowledgement part that's missing. And I do have a newsletter, which you can also sign up for.
Okay.
That newsletter does not come out all the time. The next one will probably be in May, and then I'll be doing it while the book is coming out, and then I take a break. So you're not going to get this every week or anything. It's not going to clog up your inbox.
Right. Okay.
Gives you
So there's a
progress on what's
newsletter.
going on. Yeah.
Fantastic. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been invaluable. Thanks for allowing us to.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, the pleasure is definitely all mine. So thank you, Sai. We're going to close off now. And remember, if you guys are out there searching for the truth, especially the students out there, just go out and read and know that is a lie, that it is not science versus God. In fact, God created science.
Right.
And it is perfectly compatible. And Dr. Sai is a living testimony that it is not only perfectly compatible, but it is the source of meaning, fulfillment, and life itself. As Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Signing off. We'll see you guys next time.
Amen.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reasoning with faith.